What is up, ladies and gentlemen? How are you guys doing this evening? And welcome to another exciting episode of Phenomenal Views, where you all know that the views are always phenomenal. Ladies and gentlemen, that is right. As you all know, I actually made a video earlier today where I gave my thoughts and opinions on the first Purge, the fourth Purge movie. With the time that I have with me being stuck in quarantine for 3 days, I decided, you know what, let's get down to what you've been wanting to do and make some more YouTube videos, and I decided I'm going to finally tackle all the DC animated movies that I own, and what a better way to start off than with my favorite, based on the novel by Frank Miller, DC's The Dark Knight Returns. Now, this actually is the deluxe edition that has both parts 1 and 2 on the same disc, and they run together as the same film. So once the ending of the first film wraps up, the second one immediately starts. There's no end credits for the first one. So, for those who do not know the history of this book, this one takes place after this one takes place after Death in the Family, after the death of Jason Todd, where instead of Bruce going back as Batman and being more brutal and ruthless, and thus Tim Drake stepping in to try to calm him down and basically saying, hey, Batman needs a Robin to keep him contained, this is where he just stops all of a sudden. He's quit being Batman, he's gone for 10 years, and at him being retired, Gotham's crime rate has increased dramatically up to the max, I would probably say. They say that crime has gotten so bad it is almost close to ranks with it being the Joker, with this new crime wave led by the mutant gang and the mutant leader, with them doing things like kidnapping children for ransom, and then once they get the money, killing the children anyway, killing nuns. You know, it's Gotham. Gotham is a terrible place, but without Batman to at least, you know, keep the peace somewhat, Gotham has just gone off the rails with how bad crime is. And not only that, but they were also able to throw in like this kind of heat wave. I cannot remember if that is actually in the graphic novel. I did just finish reading part 1. I think they did mention something about like this heat wave, and like how they tie it into the comic and into the animated film is this heat wave is gonna break, and when it breaks, that's like just like when all heck is going to break loose. And the animation in this movie is done tremendously well, from them capturing the scene of when Bruce has an inner monologue with himself, to the way how the cave looks, to Gotham City itself, to the mutants and the mutant leader with his oddly spiked nipples. It's weird. to just like everything, you know, you have this conversation with Jim and Bruce, and Jim is about to retire from being the police commissioner, and you know, Jim and Bruce are sitting there, you know, celebrating his retirement, and Bruce being Bruce as usual, not really talking much, and them talking about how, you know, we're glad that your blood is staying inside of you instead of outside of you. And, you know, they keep bringing up about like how back in the old days when Bruce was the Batman, and how he would fool everybody at dinner parties and stuff with his ginger ale, making it look like it was champagne, you know, all that good stuff. The voice acting in this film is amazing. I actually was kind of surprised that we did not get Kevin Conroy to come back to play old Bruce. He was old Bruce in Batman Beyond. I just don't know if they ever reached out to him. But the guy who does his voice, Pete Weller, does a really good job of playing both Bruce and Batman. He does have an alternate voice as Batman, and it is really good. We also got great chemistry between Pete Weller and Ariel Winter, as she plays Kara Kelly, who becomes Robin in this story. They had a really good chemistry with each other, even though they didn't really share that many scenes together in this one. They have more of a dynamic and a relationship in part 2. You got also good chemistry with Pete and David Selby, who plays Gordon, and then we have Gary Anthony Williams as the mutant leader. Going back and reading through the comic as I'm reading and looking at the pictures and the mutant leader talking, I'm like, I can hear that voice. You know, when you watch this movie and you go back and read that comic, you can hear these voices, and they're able to capture this more kind of violent and darker version of Gotham. Now, they did cut some stuff out. They did have to take the tone down just a little bit, because the graphic novel is extremely graphic with things I probably cannot talk about on here. But anyways, they were able to do what they could, and they toned it down just enough to where it would still be a faithful adaptation to this story. And you know, it's also a really interesting dynamic on, you know, we've let crime get so bad, you know, what do we do? Do we just sit by and let crime take over, or do we have somebody step up and do what we need to do, and thus and then that person doing that thing can inspire others to do the right thing? And yes, they do also tackle how some people will be inspired, but in the wrong way. Like in The Dark Knight, there's a scene with Bruce and Alfred, and Bruce is like, there was more copycats last night with guns. And Alfred, being Alfred, be like, why don't you hire him, take the weekend off? And Bruce was being like, that's not exactly what I had in mind when I said I wanted to inspire people. So they are showing the pros and the cons of Bruce coming back as Batman. And there is this, I swear, okay, so there is this psychologist in this story who is he's on the Batman hating freight train, and he just loves Superman. I mean, he's a Superman fanboy, but he has an argument for why Batman coming back is a bad thing. I get it. But there is an invalid argument that he makes. Now in this story, the only really returning villains that you have in this story, you have Harvey Dent as Two-Face, you have Two-Face, and in part one, that's really the only villain that you have other than the mutant gang. And there's a whole entire argument about, Batman coming back has something to do with Harvey Dent going back to crime. Well, in all honesty, Harvey Dent went missing before Batman came back, so therefore his argument is invalid, and it irritates me to death. They even say he went and disappeared, and they talk about that while Bruce is watching the news, and he's not Batman yet. I would say probably my favorite scene in this entire movie is when we get the inner monologue between Bruce and Batman. You have Batman, basically saying, you're trying to hold me back, but you're not strong enough. You know what you need to do. And we get this really epic scene they really were able to bring the strips of the comic and bring it to life, and it was amazing. There was one line that I really do wish that they had kept in this movie, and it's in Batman v Superman. It's when Alfred sees there's a buttload of wine and stuff like that, and he says, I hope that the next generation of Waynes doesn't inherit an empty wine cellar. Not that there's likely to be a next generation. I really do wish that was in here, but it's in Batman v Superman, so I'm happy. There is a funny line where Alfred is saying, if it's suicide you're after, I have an old family recipe. It's slow and painful. You'd like it. They were able to just really capture the whole thing of Alfred and Bruce's sarcastic relationship, and it is just funny. The animation is great. The pacing of the movie is done really well. There were a couple things that they did cut, they did cut Bruce's inner monologues, and they actually, instead of cutting them completely, they took them and instead of having them be inner monologues, they actually have Batman say them. But now there is one way how they subtly took one monologue, and they were able to just take some of the monologues, and they were able to just do it with the animation and make it seem like their facial expressions is exactly what they're saying. So there's a long thing in the comic about how Bruce is trying to come up with a perfect death. And there's a line in the movie where they're like, okay, are you trying to kill yourself? And Bruce just has this kind of little smirk And that was one of the only times that they ever do it. And there is another one at the very end, but they didn't do it all the time. And I think that was a really good change. The only other things that they cut was the language, like I said earlier, and they cut Gordon smoking cigars. They changed it to him chewing gum because they say in there that his wife made him quit. But they also cut certain scenes, but they made sure that the scenes that they cut were not hurtful to the plot or the pacing in any way, and actually it made it go by a lot faster. I would honestly say go and pick this up. This is actually one of my favorite stories of Batman. Now, for anyone who wants to know why, because I know a lot of people don't really like this story. Some people do and some people don't. I always like the return of a hero. That's actually why Dark Knight Rises is one of my favorite Batman movies. And that's kind of also why I kind of prefer it over the Dark Knight. I know, before you start throwing your rocks and getting your pitchforks and torches. I have always liked a hero returning story. or anything like that. I don't know why, but for some reason I have always liked that. In any Batman story or any movie of Batman that I see that has aspects of The Dark Knight Returns, that's always going to be a part of my favorite Batman story. That's what's going to make it one of my favorite Batman movies, is because of that. I love the story of an old hero coming back to do what's right. And they even do tackle about like how, you know, in this day and age, that wouldn't be allowed, like back in the old days. They do mention they don't ever reveal what time this is in, but, you know, like, there are references to, like, you know, marching and stuff like that, you know, and making me think like around like the 1960s and 70s and stuff. But overall, this is a really good movie, and I strongly recommend, if you're a Batman fan or if you're even an animated movie fan, give this a try. I think that you will honestly like it, guys. That's another review. One down, a buttload more to go. I hope you guys are staying safe and you have a good night, because I'll see you all next time when I tackle part 2. And I will be reading part 2 before I watch part 2. Have a good night, guys.